Took a few days, but here I am. We're going to pick up in chapter 3, Terra Firma, the Earth, Not a Planet, by David Wardlaw Scott. Chapter 3. The nebular hypothesis, examination of 3 alleged proofs that the world is globular. And then we got 4 sections. We got section 1, the nebular hypothesis. 2, the circumnavigation of the Earth. 3, the appearance and disappearance of ships at sea. 4, the Earth's shadow in a lunar eclipse. It was only to be expected that our modern astronomers, in the absence of any real evidence, would invent some imaginary proofs to show that the world is a planet. They have accordingly given several, which are usually introduced with words of learned length and thundering sound. Before examining the 3 referred to at the heading of this chapter, which being thought to be their best, are generally brought forward on all suitable occasions, I shall give a specimen of what some of these gentlemen consider to be a proof. Mr. Scheidler, in his book of Nature, says, by actual observation, we know that other heavenly bodies are spherical. Hence, we unhastingly assert that the earth is also. It is true that things which are equal to the same thing are equal to one another. But Mr. Scheidler, in his attempted proof, coolly takes for granted the very first premise of the preposition, namely, that the heavenly bodies and the earth are the same kind of things, which even a child knows not to be so, and which the scriptures emphatically deny. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 40. He might as well have said, an elephant has ears, I have ears, therefore I am an elephant. A fact which would certainly not be proved by this halting syllogism, I'm not sure what that means, although perhaps from his absurd conclusion that the earth is spherical because the heavenly bodies are. Some persons might be led to infer that he does not possess the reasoning faculty of that sagacious quadruped. There's some words like, I don't even know. Section 1, the nebular hypothesis. Many, if not most, modern astronomers hold what is called Laplace's grand conception, namely the nebular hypothesis, which, as stated by the well-known writer Figueroa, is as follows. The nebular theory assumes that the Earth was originally a mass of incandescent matter. In consequence of its immense expanse and attenuation, the exterior rim of vapor expanding beyond the sphere of attraction is supposed to have been thrown off by centrifugal force. This doctrine is applied to all the planets and assumes each to have been in a state of incandescent vapor with a central incandescent nucleus. As the cooling went on, each of these bodies may be supposed to have thrown off similar masses of vapor, which, by the operation of the same laws, would assume the rotary state, and as satellites revolve around the parent planet. This theory, as we will see by the words I have underlined, is one of mere assumption, without one single proof being given as to its truth. He who credits it must have the gullibility of the gudgeon, and he who can digest it would require the stomach of an ostrich. It makes God's primary creation of the universe to be only nebular, and all subsequent creation to be self-informative, whether land or water, man or animals, coals or gold, grasses or trees. It is downright atheism. As the psalmist observes, all his thoughts are, there is no God. Psalm chapter 10, verse 4. Science is such, as Mr. H.D. Brown truly remarks in his excellent pamphlet of creation, knows not God. If those holding this hypothesis had only read aright the very first verse in the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, they would have seen that the derivation derivation of the Earth as a planet from a nebulous incandescent mass is utterly untrue and contrary to all reason, because according to the above emphatic declaration, the heavens and the earth are distinctively created by God Himself. They thus bring themselves into the fearful position of denying the Word of God. Carrying out the general idea of nebulosity, some astronomers imagine the moon to have been at one time a portion of the Earth, while in a state of incandescence. Mr. Lang, however, who poses chiefly as a geologist, casts doubt upon that subject. Thus he says, page 43 of his Modern Science and Modern Thought. In this state of things, the moon is supposed to have been thrown off from the earth. Now, these conclusions may be true or not as regard phases of the earth's life prior to the Silurian period, from which downwards geology shows unmistakably that nothing of the sort or in the least approaching it has occurred. It is sad to see the absurdities and contradictions into which false science leads its votaries. It is like a bad locomotive over which the driver has lost all control, which rushes with the train down an inline till at last it leaves the rails altogether, smashing not only itself, but drawing carriages with it, and thereby causing serious disaster to many of the unfortunate passengers. The nebular hypothesis, we are told, requires many millions of years for the development of the universe. Lord Kelvin at one time estimated 400 million of years for the world to be brought to its present state of maturity, and when some demurred to that enormous period, he obliquely struck off 380 million. So that he then gave the requisite time as 20 million of years. Apart from revelation, we can form no calculation whatever as to the time occupied in creation by God, that being utterly different from the manufacturing process of man. With us both, wine and bread take a considerable time to be made, but by Christ, the wine at the marriage feast of Canaan and the bread with which he fed the multitudes in the wilderness were made in but a moment. The psalmist, in describing the earth as being God's handiwork, says, He spake and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. And that's in Psalms 33, verse 9. Referring to doubtless to the time he laid the foundations of the earth and the waters of the mighty deep. Then, as regards to light, he simply said, Let there be light. And there was light instantaneously. The true Christian rejoices in the omnipotent power as well as in the infinite love of God. The thought strengthens his faith and enables him, in his own weakness, to feel the support of the everlasting arms. He realizes that all things are his, for he is Christ, and Christ is God's. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 22 and 23. The field of nature is open up to him as his possession. As Copper beautifully sings, his are the mountains and the valleys are his, and the resplendent rivers, his to enjoy with a propriety that none can feel, but who, with filial confidence inspired, can lift to heaven an unpresumptuous eye and smilingly say, My Father made them all. I confess that I cannot imagine how any human being in his proper senses can believe that the sun is stationary when with his own eyes he sees it revolving around the heavens. Nor how can he believe that the earth on which he stands is whirling with the speed of lightning around the sun when he feels not the slightest motion. I can only account for the delusion as having been introduced by Satan into the minds of certain men who could inoculate those of others with the poison, his object being to make it appear that God is a liar, and to befool the human race, which he so much abhors. Still, I by no means think that all hold the Pythagorean fable are not Christian. For I believe that there are good men even among astronomers who are not aware of the source from which their theories spring, and do not abet the infidelity to which they tend, and whose lives are better than their philosophy. And if the heart be right with God, we may be sure that the mistakes of science will not shut the door of grace. But we must remember that there is a full reward, 2 John 1:8, for some who, as richly laden galleys, shall enter the port of peace, 2 Peter 1:2, and that there is a salvation for others who, like those who escape from a burning house, are saved so as by fire, 1 Corinthians 3:15. We must see that the nebula hypothesis is a mere myth of the imagination, utterly unworthy of acceptance by any serious thinker, as being totally opposed to scripture, reason, and fact. Let us now proceed to consider the three before mentioned alleged proofs of the world globalarity. Section 2. The circumnavigation of the earth. Circumnavigation is a loud sounding term, something like Homer celebrated. I can't read those, but it simply means sailing round. Thus, a yachtsman can leave Ryde in the morning and after a few hours, according to the state of the weather, arrive at Ryde again by circumnavigating or sailing around the Isles of Wight. So a man can circumnavigate the world from any outlying port in the extreme south, say, for example, Hobart, and return to the same port again, always premising that the sailing must be either from east to west or west to east. If you look at a Mercator's map of the world, or even at the pasteboard globe, you will at once see the impossibility of a ship circumnavigating the earth from north to south or from south to north, owing to the position of the continents and the great barriers of ice both in the northern and southern regions. But such circular sailing no more proves the world to be a globe than an equilateral triangle. The sailing around the world the sailing around the world would, of course, take very much longer, but in principle, it is exactly the same as that of a yachtsman circumnavigating the Isle of Wight. Let me give an example illustration. A boy wants to sail his iron toy boat by a magnet, so he gets a basin in the middle of which he places a soap dish or anything else which he may think suitable to represent the earth. He then fills the basin with water to display the sea. He puts in his boat and draws it by the magnet around this little world. But the boat never passes over the rim to sail under the basin, as if that were globular, instead of being simply circular. So is it in this world of ours. From the extreme south, we can sail from east to west or from west to east around it, but we cannot sail from north to south or from south to north, for we cannot break through the intervening lands nor pass the impenetrable ramparts of ice and rocks which enclose the great southern circumference. Hobart, in the latitude called by the geographers 40 degrees south, and if we sail thence in a southward direction, our voyage would at last be stopped by impassable barriers of ice. Even Keith, in his famous treatise on the use of the globes, acknowledges that the circumnavigation of the earth, as hitherto accomplished, does not prove it to be a sphere. Thus he says, since that time, Magellan, 1519 to 1523, the circumnavigation of the globe has been performed at different times by Sir Francis Drake, Lord Anson, Captain Cook, and etc. The voyages of the circumnavigators have been frequently adduced to prove that the earth is a sphere. But when we reflect that all the circumnavigators sailed westward around the globe and not northward and southward round it, they might have performed the same voyages had the earth been in the form of a drum or cylinder. Oh, wow. The farthest southern latitude yet reached is about 78 degrees, and the written accounts of those who have sailed in the Antarctic seas plainly describe the horrors of that inhospitable region. It may be well to give a few extracts from such. In his voyage to the south, Vasco da Gama remarks, the waves rose like mountains in height. Ships are heaved up to the clouds and apparently precipitated to the bed of the ocean. The winds are piercing cold and so boisterous that the pilot's voice can be scarcely heard, while a dismal and almost continual darkness adds greatly to the danger. Wow. Huh. Captain Sir James Clark Ross, RN, writes as follows in his Antarctic voyages. The sea quickly rising to a fearful height, breaking over the loftiest bergs. Our ship were enveloped in an ocean of rolling fragments of ice, as hard as a floating rock on granite, which were dashing against them with so much violence that their masts quivered as if they would fall at every successive blow. The rudders were destroyed and nearly torn from their stern posts. Hours passed away after hour without the least mitigation of the awful circumstances in which we were placed. In his exploring expedition, Commander Wilkes, USA, writes, the general health of the crew is decidedly affected. We feel ourselves obliged to report that, in our opinion, a few more days of such exposure as they have already undergone would reduce the number of the crew by sickness to such an extent as to hazard the safety of the ship and the loss of all on board. Such scenes of rigor and desolation are unknown in the northern regions, in the same degrees of latitude as to those to which the above extracts refer in the southern seas. In the Arctic, there is a spring and summer, however brief, where nature asserts her right of birth and loveliness. On this point, Wrangel writes as follows. Countless herds of reindeer, elks, black bear, foxes, sable, and gray squirrels fill the upland forest. Stone foxes and wolves roam over the low ground. Enormous flights of swans, geese, and duck arrive in spring and seek deserts where they may molt and build their nest in safety. Eagles, gulls, and owls pursue their prey along the seacoast. Ptarmigan run in troops among the bushes. Little snipes are busy among the brooks and in the morasses. The social crows seek the neighborhood of man's habitation, and when the sun shines in spring, one may sometimes even hear the cheerful note of the finch, and in autumn that of the thrush. I have given the above extracts from competent authorities in order to show the vast difference which exists in the same number of degrees of latitude between the Arctic and Antarctic regions with regard to life and vegetation. The reason of the great disparity of climate in these two regions cannot be better expressed than in the words of Parallax. Thus, it is a well-ascertained fact that the constant sunlight of the north develops with the utmost rapidity numerous forms of vegetation life, and furnishes substance for millions of living creatures. But in the south, where the sunlight never dwells or lingers about a central region, but rapidly sweeps over land and sea to complete in 24 hours the great circle of the southern circumference, it has not time to excite and stimulate the surface, and therefore, in comparatively low southern latitudes, everything wears an aspect of desolation. And there's an asterisk, and down below it's Zedic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe, page 116 and 117 by Parallax, published by Day and Sun. Then it says, I regret to say that this splendid work has for some time been out of print, and a new edition is very greatly required. Meanwhile, perhaps a stray copy might be procured by applying to Mr. John Williams, Secretary of the Universal Zedic Society. The last price which I heard was paid for the work was, and it looks like 1 lire, I'm not sure. The original cost was 7. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure. Forgive me. Okay, let's go back to the book. At a glance at the map at the beginning of this book will show that the parallels of latitude, instead of converging towards the south as astronomers and geographers tell us they do, gradually expand from the north center towards the boundaries of the great southern circumference. Within the last 70 years, there has been quite a mania for expeditions to the North Pole, while the poor South has been shamefully neglected. Is this because it is so very far away from us, or because it is secretly feared by our astronomical friends that there may be no South Pole? at all, so that their fond hopes of the Earth being a globular planet would be at one fell swoop dispelled. And like the baseless fabric of a vision, leave not a rack behind. The result of the Challenger's prolonged cruise, as has been stated, of 70,000 miles, did not do much to raise their expectations. For like a discouraged deerhound that had lost the quarry, she did not discover a passage to the supposed other side of the world through the ice-bound waters of the South. Should, however, our astronomers consider the problem of a South Pole to be still unsolved, I would advise them, with the assistance of their good friend, the government, to fit out another Challenger and endeavor to break the record of former explorers. At the same time, I confess that I have a strong conviction that their steamer would be no more able to circumnavigate the world by forcing a passage through the mighty ramparts of the South than for a balloonist to steer his course through the bands of Orion. And then it's an asterisk. Since the above was written, I have been glad to learn that a British Antarctic expedition, assisted by the government, is now in progress. Also, that another has been promoted by Germany, both being expected to sail from their respective countries in the ensuing summer. Section 3. The appearance and disappearance of ships at sea. The astronomical argument is as follows. The hull of a ship, being larger than the mast, should at a distance be first visible in approaching the shore, but it is not, the mast being seen first. Again, in sailing from the shore, the hull, for the above reason, should be last seen, but it is not, for the masts are, therefore, the sea must be globular. The late Professor Huxley gave us a tidbit of astronomic reasoning on the above alleged proof, which is so very, and I'm not sure what that word is, that it might be gilt framed and placed in the hall of the Royal Society. It is as follows. We assume the convexity of water because we have no other way to explain the appearance and disappearance of ships at sea. We assume, therefore, water is convex. Surely this celebrated scientist should have known that no real proof can be drawn from mere assumption. The argument may be Huxleyan, but it is certainly not Baconian. And as he acknowledged that he had no other explanation to offer for the convexity of water, we must just take it for what it's worth, which is simply nothing. Some years ago, the late Mr. R.A. Proctor, a well-known writer and lecturer on astronomy, wrote 2 articles in Knowledge on the above subject called Pretty Proof of the Earth's Rotundity. But alas, for the pretty proof, as it was soon found to be no proof at all, and would never have been brought forward to prove the supposed convexity of water from the appearance and disappearance of ships at sea, had astronomers been aware of the true law of perspective. This law at the horizon requires the eye of the observer to see the higher part of an object before he can see the lower. The horizon, on the line where the sea and the sky seem to meet, is always on a level with the eye, no matter how high the observer may be above the water's surface. This is evident even from a balloon, as the following extract from the London Journal on July 1857 will show. The chief peculiarity of the view from a balloon at a considerable elevation was the altitude of the horizon, which remained practically on a level with the eye, and an elevation of 2 miles, causing the surface of the earth to appear concave instead of convex, and to recede during the rapidity of ascent, while the horizon in the balloon seemed to be stationary. Mr. Glaisher writes in a like manner as to his experience in a balloon. The horizon always appears on a level with the eye. Mr. Elliot, an American aeronaut, gives a similar testimony in a letter from Baltimore. I don't know if I ever hinted heretofore that the aeronaut may well be the most skeptical man about the rotundity of the earth. Philosophy impresses the truth upon us, but the view of the earth from the elevation and that of a vast terrestrial basin, the deeper part of which is that directly under one's feet. As we ascend, the earth seems to recede, actually to sink away, while the horizon gradually and gracefully lifts, a diversified slope stretching away further and further to the line that at the highest elevation seems to close with the sky. Thus, upon a clear day, the aeronaut feels as if suspended at about an equal distance between the vast blue oceanic concave above and the equally expanded basin below. This law of perspective meets us on every hand and cannot be gainsaid. If on a straight road we observe a row of lamps which are all of the same size, we shall find that from our standpoint, that height will gradually diminish as we look as we look toward the farther end. But if we ourselves approach to that end, the nearer we get to it, the higher proportionally will the lamps appear. Again, if on a straight line we look at a frozen lake with a certain distance, we shall observe people who appear to be skating on their knees. But if we approach sufficiently near, we shall see them performing graceful motions on their feet. Farther, if we look through a straight tunnel, we shall notice that the roof and the roadway below converge to a point of light at the end. It is the same law which makes the hills sink to the horizon as the observer recedes, which explains how the ship's hull disappears in the offing. I would also remark that when the sea is undisturbed by waves, the whole can be restored to sight by the aid of a good telescope long after it has disappeared from the naked eye, thus proving that the ship had not gone down behind the watery hill of a convex globe, but is still sailing on the level of a plain sea. We are generally treated in astronomical books with a diagram illustrative of Proctor's pretty proof. Three ships on the arc of a circle, one being near the top, one toward each end of the arc. I have one before me now on page 69 of the well-known work Joyce's Scientific Dialogues, published by Milner and Company, Limited, London. I got it lately in order to refresh my memory with some of the curiosities of modern science while writing this book. The curve of the arc measures 3 inches, and if it were continued, the whole circle would be about 8 inches, representing the presumed circumference of the world, equal to 25,000 miles at the equator. The length of each ship in 3/8 of an inch is 3/8 of an inch, so that by the rule of simple proportion, each ship would be about 1,171 miles long. Why are such absurd diagrams given, if not to deceive the eye and warp the judgment of the unsuspecting reader? In closing my remarks on this pretty proof of the Earth's rotundity, I beg to subjoin the following questions asked by Zetis in his article on ships at sea in the October 1893 number of the Earth, Not a Globe Review. In the diagrams of ships at sea given in astronomical works, why are the ships placed near the top and not under? Why is the first ship not placed on the top? Why near the top? Why near the top and always to go up first than to go down afterwards? Has any objects in nature ever been seen to rise prospectively as it recedes and then remaining at the same altitude to descend? By whom? When? Where? Is not the observer always on the top of the earth? If not, why not? If the earth were a globe, would not the horizon be a tangent to the sphere at the point of observation? If so, ought not a ship begin to descend at once as soon as it leaves the observer? Why does a vessel not suit its behavior to the globular theory? Is it because it is only a theory? Why do astronomers violate the law of perspective when they make diagrams of ship at sea? And now, when the tricks of the so-called astronomical science are exposed, why should not all our readers believe the plain truth that the earth and sea form one vast, outstretched, and circular plane? Section 4, the Earth's shadow in a lunar eclipse. The moon has been a sad trouble to our modern astronomers, as she has so often belied their theories. By being determined to make use of her somehow, they assert that the globularity of the Earth is proved by the shadow of the Earth passing over her in a round form during a lunar eclipse. Before entering into this subject, it may be as well to say a few words respecting eclipses. Many people, when they find an eclipse takes place at the time predicted, are apt to think what a wonderful science modern astronomy must be that can foretell such events so exactly. But the truth is that the reoccurrence of eclipses are mere matters of calculation from those which have happened to certain times before, and it is known by experience that such will take place at certain times again. The Chaldeans calculated them thousands of years ago, and Articus and Ptolemy could predict we'll soon put matters straight. What happened here? Hold on. I feel like we almost skipped something. I don't know. The Chaldeans calculated them thousands of years ago, and Articus and Ptolemy could predict. And then it says, we'll soon put matters straight, Shakespeare says. The earth hath hubbles as the water hath. Hubbles? Or is that bubbles? No, I think that's hubbles as the water hath. Forgive me. And the theory of the world rushing around the sun, impelled by the hypothetic law of gravitation, is one of the biggest that ever required pricking. The word telleth, or tella, means to hang, suspend, or support by actual contact. Thus, to give a few instances. Shall hang thee upon a tree. Genesis chapter 11:19. I think that's 11, maybe it's 15:18. On the willows in the midst thereof we hanged our harps. Hold on, I feel like we have skipped something here, and I don't know what happened. 76, section 4. I don't know. Forgive me. I don't know. It just seemed like, almost felt like I skipped something, but I didn't. I'm looking and I have not skipped anything. So let me continue here. But Belima wrongly translated. No, let's see. Let me go back up. I'm going to go right here. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be confusing, but it really does look like all of a sudden we're talking about a different subject altogether, but we're really not. So I don't know. Let's see. Articus and Ptolemy could predict we'll soon put matters straight. All right. Shakespeare says, the earth hath hubbles as the water hath, and the theory of the world rushing around the sun, impelled by the hypothetic law of gravitation, is one of the biggest that ever required pricking. The word tella means to hang, suspend, or support by actual contact. Thus, to give a few instances, shall hang thee upon a tree. On the willows in the midst thereof we hanged up our harps. Will men take a pin of it to hang any vessel thereon? But Belmaya, wrongly translated nothing, is the crucial word. Our translators appear to have derived it from the noun bli, signifying consumption or desolation, and the pronoun ma, who, which, what, but the meaning nothing, drawn from these words seem to be far-fetched. Hebrew is a very ancient language, in all probability the most ancient of any, and this being the only place in the Bible where the word Belmia occurs, it is, of course, difficult to test the meaning. I have myself, however, not the slightest doubt that Parkhurst is right in deriving the noun Belmaya from the verb bellum, to confine, restrain, or hold in. so used in Psalm chapter 32, verse 9, and that Belmaya simply means fastenings or supports. And this interpretation exactly agrees with what Jehovah asked Job a little farther on. Whereupon are the foundations, Adamah, sockets, made to sink, or who laid the cornerstone thereof? Job chapter 38, verse 6. But while I considered Parkhurst to be correct as to the rendering of the word Belmaya, I believe him to be wrong as to the strange them as well as Newton or Laplace. Mrs. Somerville, in her Physical Sciences, page 46, remarks, no particular theory is required to calculate eclipses, and the calculations may be made with equal accuracy, independent of every theory. I remember a good story respecting a man who had been summoned to give evidence in a certain trial. He did not appear, but a friend came in his stead. Why, asked the judge, does Mr. Blank not appear? My lord, replied the man, I could give your lordship a dozen reasons why he could not come. Let us have them then, said the judge. In the first place, my lord, my friend is dead. That will do, said his lordship. You can keep your 11 other reasons to yourself. So the earth, having been proved by experiment to have no curvature, and is declared by God to be founded upon the seas and established upon the floods, that fact ought, as a matter of course, to be a sufficient reason why it is not a wandering planet, and therefore that would be as impossible for its shadow to cause an eclipse of the moon as for that dead man to give evidence in a court of law. Still, perhaps, it may be useful and interesting to make a few remarks respecting this alleged proof, as they will show some of the great mistakes which our modern astronomers have made. According to the Newtonian theory, it is necessary in a lunar eclipse for the sun to be on the opposite side of the supposed global Earth, so that the Earth's shadow may thus, in passing, be cast upon the moon. But as for lunar eclipses have occurred when both the sun and moon were above the horizon, it stands to reason that in such circumstances it would be absolutely impossible for the shadow of the earth to have been the cause of the eclipse of the moon. During an eclipse of the moon, its surface has repeatedly been seen during the whole time it lasted, thus clearly proving that its eclipse could not have been caused by the shadow of the earth. I quote the following illustration of the fact from what took place at Cullompton, Devonshire on 19th March 1848. The appearances were, as usual, 20 minutes past 9. At that period, and for the space of the next hour, instead of an eclipse or the shadow umbra of the earth being the cause of the total obscurity of the moon, the whole phase of that body became very quickly and most beautifully illuminated, and assumed the appearance of the glowing heat of fire from the furnace rather than tinged with a deep red. The whole disk of the moon being as perfect with light as if there had been no eclipse whatever. The moon positively gave good light from its disk during the total eclipse. And that's in Philosophical Magazine, number 220 for August 1848. Again, the earth was a supposed diameter of 8,000 miles, is said to revolve around the sun with a velocity of about 1,111 miles per minute. The moon being reckoned to have a diameter of 2,200 miles and to go around the earth at the rate of 180 miles per minute. Thus, according to calculations, the eclipse of the moon, by the shadow of the earth passing it, should not take 4 minutes, whereas the usual time occupied by a lunar eclipse is usually about 2 hours, and it has been known to have been extended to 4. Parallax sums up the matter as follows and quotes several instances to show that the opinion has lately gained ground among astronomers of note that there are non-luminous bodies in the heavens which may cause an eclipse of the moon. We have seen that during a lunar eclipse that moon luminous surface is covered by a semi-transparent something that has something in a definite mass because it has a distinct and circular outline as seen during its first and last contact with the moon. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing before the sun, so from the evidence above collected. Hold on. I'm having a problem here. Somebody's trying to call. I'm sorry. I gotta let it pass. Hold on. All right. We have seen that during a lunar eclipse, the moon's self-luminous surface is covered by a semi-transparent something. That this something is a definite mass because it has a distinct and circular outline, as seen during its first and last contact with the moon. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing before the sun, so from the evidence above collected, it is evident that a lunar eclipse rises from a similar cause. A body, self-transparent and well-defined, passing before the moon. A body semi-transparent and well-defined passing before the moon or between the moon's surface and the observer of the surface of the earth. That many such bodies exist in the firmament is almost a matter of certainty, and that one such as that which eclipses the moon exists at no great distance above the earth's surface is a matter admitted by many of the leading astronomers of the day. It is thus clearly evident that there is not the shadow of a proof that the shadow of the earth is the cause of lunar eclipse, and therefore no argument can be drawn from this alleged proof that the earth is a globular planet. I doubt not that many of my readers know the famous passage in the Aeneid. Let's see, it's I can't read that. That's in Greek or something. I'm not sure if that's Greek or what. So let's see. It is true that Virgil did not write as an astronomer, but as a poet. Yet the thought has occurred to me that the above lines with a small parenthetical addition might be suitably employed to show the impossibility of our world be suitably employed to show the impossibility of our world careering around the sun, and might perhaps be read with renewed appreciation by some of our repentant astronomers thus: it is easy to descend to the lower regions, but for the earth to retrace its steps and ascend to the upper skies, there is the difficulty. This is the task. And then that ends that. I'm so sorry for all the interruptions and the confusion there. It was like it did not flow. It was like I was missing a page almost. That's what it appeared to me as. I could be totally wrong, but it just appeared that way. So anyway, God bless you all so very much. Have a beautiful day. Keep your eyes on Jesus, your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day.